My uncle Hiroshi never spoke about what happened that October night at Nemuro Pier until the cancer took his voice forever. He was obsessed with night fishing. Every weekend he'd drive 3 hours to the remote pier on Hokkaido's eastern coast. The locals warned him about fishing there after midnight. They spoke of the woman in white who walked the pier, searching for her lost child. But Uncle Hiroshi laughed at their superstition. That night, the fog rolled in thick from the Nemuro Strait. Visibility dropped to mere meters, but the fish were biting. Around 2 a.m. he felt something heavy on his line, heavier than any fish he'd ever caught. As he reeled it in, he heard sobbing in the fog, a woman's voice broken with grief. "Have you seen my son?" The voice grew closer. Footsteps echoed on the wooden planks, wet, dragging footsteps. His rod bent almost to breaking. Whatever he'd hooked was fighting back. "Please help me find my son." The voice was right behind him now. He turned around and saw her through the fog, pale, dripping, her kimono clinging to her skeletal frame. But her eyes were holes of endless sorrow. That's when he realized what was on his hook. Not a fish, a small hand, a child's hand, pale and bloated. He cut the line and ran. Behind him, the woman's wails echoed across the water. He never went night fishing again. But sometimes on foggy nights, he'd wake up to find his fishing gear laid out by the door, and the smell of seawater in his bedroom. She was still looking for her son. There's a reason the monks at Lake Chuzenji forbid fishing after the evening prayer, and my friend Takeshi learned why. Lake Chuzenji sits high in the mountains of Nika. Sacred waters, they say, fed by hot springs and watched over by ancient temples. But Takeshi was desperate. He'd been fishing all day with nothing to show for it. As the sun set behind Mount Nantai, he made a decision. He would stay after dark. The temple bells rang 9 times across the water. Evening prayers had begun, but Takeshi cast his line into the sacred waters anyway. The lake was perfectly still, like black glass reflecting the stars. Then, something grabbed his bait, but it didn't feel like a fish. It felt intelligent, as if whatever was down there was testing him, playing with him. The line went slack, then tight again, slack, tight, like Morse code. That's when he heard the chanting, not from the temple, but from beneath the water. Voices, dozens of them, speaking in ancient Japanese he couldn't understand. The water began to glow, a pale, sickly light rising from the depths. And in that light he saw them, figures in monk robes, sitting in perfect circles on the lake bed. Their eyes were gone, hollow sockets staring up at him. The chanting grew louder. His rod was pulled so hard it nearly broke his wrist. They wanted him to join them, to complete their circle of eternal prayer. Takeshi cut the line and ran to his car. But as he drove away, he could still hear them chanting. And every night since, he dreams of sitting at the bottom of Lake Chuzenji. His eyes are gone, and he's chanting words he doesn't understand. In Tokyo, even the urban rivers hold secrets, and the Sumida River keeps the darkest ones of all. My colleague Yamada-san worked the night shift at a nearby office building. During his breaks, he'd fish from the Azuma Bridge. The city lights reflected on the dark water like fallen stars. It was peaceful, meditative, until that rainy Tuesday in March. The river was higher than usual, murky brown water rushing faster than normal. But Yamada-san cast his line anyway. Almost immediately, something bit, something big. As he reeled it in, he felt resistance. Not the thrashing of a fish, but the dead weight of something waterlogged. When it broke the surface, his blood went cold, pale, bloated, muffed. The hook had caught a gold wedding ring, but as he stared in horror, the fingers began to move. They curled around his fishing line, gripping, pulling. Then more hands emerged from the water, dozens of them, reaching up through the murky surface, all wearing rings, all grasping at his line. The river began to whisper, voices of the drowned, speaking in unison. "Join us, the water is warm, the water is home." Yamada-san tried to let go of his rod, but his hands wouldn't obey. The hands in the water were pulling him closer to the edge. His feet slipped on the wet concrete. Just as he was about to fall in, a police siren wailed in the distance. The hands vanished instantly. The whispers stopped. His fishing line hung broken and empty. But when he looked at his hands, there were wet fingerprints on his wrist. The next morning, they found 17 bodies in the Sumida River, all wearing wedding rings. The police said they'd been in the water for months, but Yamada-san knew better. They'd been waiting, and they're still waiting. Off the coast of Shimane, the Oki Islands hide fishing spots that haven't changed for 1,000 years, and neither have their guardian. My grandfather's friend, old Sato-san, ran fishing tours there. He knew every reef, every current, every secret cove, but there was one spot he never took toward, a small inlet on Nishinoshima Island. The locals called it Kappa no Iru, the place where the Kappa lived. One summer night, a wealthy businessman from Tokyo hired Sato-san for a private trip. The man was arrogant, demanding. When Sato-san refused to take him to the forbidden inlet, the businessman offered triple the usual fee. Money was tight. Sato-san's boat needed repairs. Against his better judgment, he agreed. They arrived at the inlet just after midnight. The water was impossibly clear, even in the darkness. You could see straight down to the rocky bottom. The businessman cast his line with expensive gear. Within minutes, something bit. The fight was incredible. Whatever was on the line had strength beyond any normal fish. For 30 minutes, the businessman battled his cat. Sweat poured down his face as his rod bent nearly in half. Finally, something broke the surface. But it wasn't a fish. It was a child, green-skinned, webbed hands. A bowl-shaped depression in its skull, filled with water. The creature's eyes burned with ancient rage. It spoke in perfect formal Japanese. "You have disturbed the sacred water. You must pay the price." The businessman laughed. "Impossible, Kappa aren't real." The creature smiled, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Then you won't mind if I take what's mine." The water around the boat began to churn. More Kappa emerged, dozens of them. They surrounded the boat with hungry eyes. The businessman's arrogance crumbled into terror. Sato-san grabbed the offerings he always carried, cucumbers and rice balls. He threw them into the water and bowed deeply. "Please, honored spirit, forgive this foolish man." The lead Kappa considered this for a long moment. Finally it nodded. "The old man shows proper respect. You may leave." But the intruder stayed. Before Sato-san could react, webbed hands pulled the businessman overboard. He never surfaced again. But sometimes on calm nights, fishermen report seeing a figure in an expensive suit swimming just below the surface. His skull now bears the telltale bowl of a cod, and he's always so very hungry. Some fishermen never stop fishing, even after death claims them. Near Kagoshima, there's a small fishing village called Makurazaki. The older residents still remember Tanaka-san. He fished the same spot every night for 40 years. A rocky outcrop just past the harbor breakwater. Rain or shine, calm or storm, he'd be there from sunset to sunrise. One typhoon night, the waves were too dangerous. Everyone stayed home, everyone except Tanaka-san. They found his rod the next morning, still cast into the churning sea, but his body was never recovered. The village held a funeral with an empty cabin. Life went on, but a month later, fishermen began reporting strange sightings. A figure on the rocky outcrop, always fishing, always alone. My friend Kenji didn't believe the story. He decided to fish from Tanaka-san's old spot one night. As he cast his line into the dark water, he heard the soft splash of another line being cast nearby. But when he looked, he was alone on the rock. Then he heard a familiar voice. "Good evening, young man. The fish are biting tonight." Kenji's blood turned to ice. He recognized that voice from childhood. Tanaka-san. Slowly, he turned his head. There, not 3 meters away, sat a translucent figure. Tanaka-san's goat, exactly as he'd been in life. Weathered fishing hat, worn jacket, his rod cast perfectly into the waves. "Don't mind me," the ghost said with a gentle smile. "I'm just waiting for the big one." Kenji couldn't move, couldn't speak. They fished in silence for what felt like hours, neither man catching anything. As dawn approached, Tanaka-san's ghost began to fade. "Time to go," he said softly. "But I'll be back tonight, always back. Some habits death can't break." The ghost smiled one last time. "Take care of this spot for me, won't you?" And then he was gone. But his fishing line remained in the water, still waiting for the catch of a lifetime. They say he's still there every night, patient, eternal. And if you're brave enough to fish beside him, he might just teach you where the biggest fish hide. But remember, some fishing trips last forever.